Now, Dr. Sabrina N'Diaye,
Wow,
right?
very good. I'm impressed.
I
Okay,
got
yeah,
it.
that's my last name.
I got it. And I know that you are a healer, and you called yourself a peace builder,
Yes.
and then finally a therapist. Now, can you explain to me, because I've been struggling a lot with my friends and I have been having many conversations about this, peace of mind. And so far, with how far my thinking has gone, I've realized that, I mean, maybe just peace of mind is an oxymoron, because maybe the mind is never meant to be at peace. And it's constantly, and it's the beauty in the struggle of the mind. What do you say to that? Am I wrong on that?
Well, no, there's no wrong or right answer around it, but the way I teach it and the way I guide other people is sort of what you're saying, and that peace of mind is a journey. And there are always going to be disruptions to our peace. And so peace is a choice. And so we engage in practices to bring us back to that place of peace. Does that make sense?
Right.
So, I mean, you think of an example like this whole COVID thing. We were just talking about how college students had to hurry up and go home, and no one really knew what was happening at that time. So there was a disruption to the peace. And when that disruption happens, the sympathetic nervous system gets revved up. And that's the part of the nervous system that says, go, run, fight, fly away, play dead. But inner peace happens when you're out of the physical danger and you can actually breathe and be in connection with people, make different decisions, and process the situation so that when it happens again, you're better prepared, but you don't have to live in this place of agitation. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this then. It seems like people who are living in war-struck areas or more impoverished areas usually tend to have a lower suicide rate than people who are physically at peace. So what's going on there? Because, if anything, us American kids, us Muslim Americans are very spoiled. We have a lot of resources, and any American really is very spoiled relative to the rest of the world.
Absolutely.
Yet we seem to be more drugged than any other country in the world. We seem to have more depression and anxiety than the rest of the world, even though we have the physical peace in place. What's going on there?
Well, now you're talking about a whole nother illness, and it's an illness of isolation, like spiritual isolation. It's an illness of the perception of separation, and there's an illness that all of us, many of us in America are struggling with, and it's the way we worship the things that we have, and the way we make comparisons. And those comparisons, that sense of isolation, this false notion of separation, all of these elements create inflammation in the body. And when the body is inflamed, the mind cannot be at peace. And so these actions of harming oneself, they're all a result of a perception of separation. And so it has nothing to do with whether or not people have money. Because you can be completely broke and still feel like you're a part of a community and still engage in spiritual practice that actually bring you to peace. And if you have lots of things, you may have lots of things that can distract you from being in community and from having that sense of peace.
Ah, nice. So it's the fact that we have an individualistic society.
Completely.
Right. Is there any way to mend that, or try to create a virtual, because we live in we live in nuclear families, like my parents have done a pretty good job of adding families around us that are Muslim and stuff, but not everyone, no one basically has that. So is there a way to mend that personally?
Well, what your parents did is a way to mend it. That's one way of mending it, of recognizing that we don't have to be alone. Recognizing that everyone is running around looking for connection, and that if we can just take that risk and step out of what we perceive to be our comfort zone, then we can create new families. And there's nothing new about creating a family. That's not necessarily your family of origin. That's how multiple cultures have survived horrific life experiences. But if we think that we're the only one, and that's really where we can get caught and end up down a really scary, slippery slope. So one of the things that I do is I facilitate a lot of groups. And in groups, people realize, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one that thinks like that. I'm not the only one that has that experience. I'm not the only one that has even thought about something as dangerous as harming myself. Wow. And there's something very healing that happens in that place of feeling validated. Because the community also has to be real. It can't be, when I say real, I mean it has to be a place where people also feel safe and accepted.
Oh, that's a big deal.
It is.
Okay, yeah.
It
I
is.
agree with that 100% because we had that community going, but still there was a lot of judgment, a lot of parents saying, because parents tend to do this all the time where they blame everyone but their child for what for what it is. So we had a whole bunch of that. And what you're saying is something that I've read about and listened to on TED Talks a lot, which is that when you change your perception from I to we, when you realize that you're not the center of your own universe, that it's actually you are a tiny specimen looking out into a much more complex world, and you look at it from that view, life becomes a lot more beautiful. And that's difficult for a lot of people because we have so many mirrors. I was watching this psychologist who talked about mirrors being an issue, where too many of them, like you're just sitting there staring at yourself.
Real physical mirrors.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Literally mirrors. Like we shouldn't be looking at ourselves. Like no one in past history looked at themselves constantly the way we do.
Yeah, that's true. We do.
And so we just have this always this sense of self going. And it's very difficult to go over because then it actually leads to having self-esteem issues. And I want to talk to you about this because no one ever brings it up because everyone brings up self-esteem issues. I actually am one of the people who suffer from self-appraisal, where my self constantly, tells itself, oh, wow, you're awesome, you're amazing, you're all this. And it's as detrimental, it's as hurtful as self-esteem. Can you walk me through that, like both of them and how?
Well, yeah, they both make sense. So even if you are constantly praising yourself, that can also be the sign. It's like it's the mirror, right? It's actually your self-esteem is not as strong as it should be. Because there's this place in the middle where we always have to be mindful of, am I being arrogant? Am I being humble? Am I being open? Am I being closed? Is my heart in constriction towards other people, or is it in constriction towards myself? And so it's like, so for me, spiritual practices lend itself to us coming back to asking ourselves questions.
So what do you mean by spiritual practices?
So as a Muslim, I pray 5 times a day and I add a lot of little extra stuff to it. But every spiritual tradition has a practice of really knowing yourself. And there's a saying, obviously, in Islam that says, when you know yourself, then you know your Lord. I actually tell people, when you know yourself, then you know what you worship. So if you recognize that you're constantly staring in the mirror, then I'm going to be really very politely opening a door for you to admit that might be what you worship, your own face. And this face, while it may be youthful when you're 25, it's going to change when you're 54. And can you love this face no matter what shape or form it takes? Can you love this body no matter what it looks like, whether it's fat or skinny, whether it's scarred or different? Can you really just love what's in your hands right now? And so to me, that self-love with humility is also a part of any spiritual practice. So I take people that Muslim, non-Muslim, atheist, heathen, whatever you call yourself, it's fine with me. I'm like that Rumi poem. Worshipper, wanderer, lover of leaving, I don't care. But one of the spiritual practices that I teach people is just how to breathe. The breath it can be a spiritual practice, accessing the breath. In Arabic is what is breath. But you can't live more than 3 minutes without breathing. So taking that moment and pausing and breathing, it seems so simple, But that breath allows us to access the real answers about ourselves. So I teach my clients basically how to breathe. We breathe for 10 minutes at the beginning of our sessions together. When I'm finished with my regular obligatory prayers, I sit with my breath for 10, 15 minutes. That's one practice that's really important to me. The other one is movement. And it's interesting how our 5 obligatory prayers involve movement, but then also just shaking for a little while can bring our nervous systems back into alignment. So I do that every day, and I teach my clients to do that. Then talking to other people can be a spiritual practice. See, I'm looking you in the eye, right? So there's a conversation here, and there's a conversation underneath that's happening. That can also be a part of our spiritual practices. Journaling. And I don't mean like typing on your laptop, because a lot of people just want to type. I mean taking pen to hand and writing out your thoughts, no matter how crazy they are, can bring a level of self-awareness. And everything I'm sharing is sort of these universal practices from every tradition. And we know from the research that they actually bring healing into the body.